So the regulations again say that they have an auditing requirement, saying every food, what they call as a designated officer, or every area should sample so many things. So FSSAI does provide a guideline for sampling and auditing. Food safety officers can visit you.
But help me understand, journey of food, goes through, various, especially in the supply chain, Indian context, right? Goes to various processes. One, it also goes to various nodes in the supply chain. You have a factory, you have maybe a ST, warehouse, retailer. And we've seen typically at retailers or kirana stores where there's a good chance of contamination happening. So how is that controlled?
So if we go by the regulation, everybody in the supply chain is expected to follow a certain set of systems and processes.
Okay.
So if you look at a retail kirana store, they may or may not be following the process, unfortunately.
Okay.
So there are requirements of segregation. You make sure that the product is not getting mixed up with other things, right? So food is kept separately. There are storage guidelines. There is cleaning and sanitization guidelines. So you make sure that you're cleaning your premises properly. Then there is pest management guidelines, making sure that there are no pests there. There are storage guidelines. If a product requires it to be stored in a certain condition, then you have to maintain that. It could be cold chain, it could be normal temperature. So it requires that the retailer also follow each one of the steps. And in the absence of that is where you would hear some of these incidents.
We've heard a lot of cases about chocolates, people finding worms in chocolates. Do you think that's mostly happens at the last mile of the retailer end, or do you think that could also be happening earlier, much earlier in the chain?
So the chocolate case is very unique.
Okay.
Most incidents likely happen at the last mile.
Okay.
But there was one particular case, I think, which is the most popular one, which happened because, so what can happen is there are eggs which can get into the product and there is no good way to destroy it. And chocolate particularly, so if you look at ways of eliminating hazards, heat is the most common one.
Okay.
And chocolate does not go through a high heat process. So there is potential. Of course, there are now processes which will help you eliminate that in other ways. But at that point of time, it was probably an egg or a larvae which developed inside the packet, and it was actually coming from the factory.
Okay.
But I think that's different now.
Okay.
All the processes have been fixed and that does not happen anymore.
Interesting. Okay. So, in terms of processes, these are just processes that company needs to follow, or there are, bodies which also audit these companies to make sure these are getting followed? Okay.
So, the regulator kind of puts together a set of guidelines saying, they are high-level guidelines.
Okay.
Saying, you have to, let's take an example of FSSAI. It says that you must have a hazard-based food safety management systems. That is
for the manufacturer.
That is for the manufacturer, or even for a distributor.
Okay.
So they say that. Now, what does that mean is something that the manufacturers themselves have to specify. Because each product is different, each process is different.
Mm-hmm.
So they have to do the due diligence and come up with the process. And they are expected to validate the process, saying this is my process and it works, and then follow the process. So if we were to follow that whole cycle, then it should mostly work. It is a self-enforcement. It's a preventive system.
Understood.
It is not a corrective system. It's not post-factor, it's pre-factor.
Okay.
So you just follow the system, and hopefully it's a controlled system. So like any other system design, you expect that the system is a controlled system. You have a box in which the processes are defined. You define what goes in, and that way you will always know what comes out, right?
Understood.
So if the input is fixed, the process is fixed, the output should be fixed.
Okay.
So that's really the whole principle that expects, the government expects you to do.
Understood. But there's no audits or anything like that what would happen.
So there is a requirement. So the regulations again say that they have an auditing requirement, saying every food, what they call as a designated officer, or every area should sample so many things.
Okay.
So FSSAI does provide a guideline for sampling and auditing. Food safety officers can visit you. So regulation provides for them to come in if they think they anticipate an issue. As a preventive measure, they can come in, inspect your factory, collect samples from you, send them to the lab. If they find discrepancy, you will be asked to provide clarification on that, satisfactory clarification. There are penal fines if you don't comply. So all of that is there.
Understood.